On her deathbed, the fortitude and benignity of this admirable woman did not desert her. She joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself. My children, she said, my firmest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This expectation will now be the consolation of your father. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to your younger cousins. Alas, I regret that I'm taken from you, and happy and beloved as I have been, is it not hard to quit you all? But these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavor to resign myself cheerfully to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world. She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. All right, so mom dies of scarlet fever. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by that most irreparable evil, death, the void that presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she, whom we saw every day, and whose very existence appeared a part of our own, can have departed forever, that the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days, but when the lapse of time proves the reality of the evil, then the actual bitterness of grief commences. Yet from whom has not that rude hand rent away some dear connection? And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt and must feel? The time at length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity, and the smile that plays upon the lips, although it may be deemed as sacrilege, is not banished. My mother was dead, but we still had duties which we ought to perform. We must continue our course with the rest, and learn to think ourselves fortunate, whilst one remains whom the spoiler has not seized. My journey to Ingolstadt, which had been deferred by these events, was now again determined upon. I obtained from my father a respite of some weeks. This period was spent sadly. My mother's death and my speedy departure depressed our spirits. But Elizabeth endeavored to renew the spirit of cheerfulness in our little society. Since the death of her aunt, her mind had acquired new firmness and vigor. She determined to fulfill her duties with the greatest exactness, and she felt that that most imperious duty of rendering her uncle and cousins happy had devolved upon her. She consoled me, amused her uncle, instructed my brothers, and I never beheld her so enchanting as at this time, when she was continually endeavoring to contribute to the happiness of others, entirely forgetful of herself. Remember, Elizabeth, the ultimate selfless, wonderful, loving person who everybody loves. The day of my departure for college at length arrived, Frankenstein tells us. I had taken leave of all my friends excepting Clerval, who spent the last evening with us. He bitterly lamented that he was unable to accompany me, but his father could not be persuaded to part with him, intending that he should become a partner with him in business, in compliance with his favorite theory, that learning was superfluous in the commerce of ordinary life. Henry had a refined mind. He had no desire to be idle, and was well pleased to become his father's partner, but he believed that a man might be a very good trader, and yet possess a cultivated understanding. We sat late, listening to his complaints, and making many little arrangements for the future. The next morning early I departed. Tears gushed from the eyes of Elizabeth. They proceeded partly from sorrow at my departure, and partly because she reflected that the same journey was to have taken place 3 months before, when a mother's blessing would have accompanied me. I threw myself into the chase that was to convey me away, and indulged in the most melancholy reflections. I, who had ever been surrounded by amiable companions, continually engaged in endeavoring to bestow mutual pleasure, I was now alone. In the university whither I was going, I must form my own friends and be my own protector. My life had hitherto been remarkably secluded and domestic, but this had given me invincible repugnance to new countenances. I loved my brothers, Elizabeth and Clerval. These were, quote, old familiar faces, but I believed myself totally unfitted for the company of strangers. Such were my reflections as I commenced my journey, but as I proceeded, my spirits and hopes rose. I ardently desired the acquisition of knowledge. I had often, when at home, thought it hard to remain during my youth cooped up in one place, and had longed to enter the world and take my station among other human beings. Now my desires were complied with, and it would indeed have been folly to repent. I had sufficient leisure for these and many other reflections during my journey to Ingolstadt, which was long and fatiguing. At length, the high white steeple of the town met my eyes. I alighted and was conducted to my solitary apartment to spend the evening as I pleased. The next morning, I delivered my letters of introduction and paid a visit to some of the principal professors, and among others to Monsieur Krempe, professor of natural philosophy. He received me with politeness and asked me several questions concerning my progress in the different branches of science appertaining to natural philosophy. I mentioned, it is true, with fear and trembling, the only authors I had ever read upon those subjects. The professor stared. "Have you," he said, "really spent your time in studying such nonsense?" I replied in the affirmative. "Every minute," continued Monsieur Krempe with warmth, "every instant that you have wasted on those books is utterly and entirely lost. You've burdened your memory with exploded systems and useless names. Good God, in what desert land have you lived where no one was kind enough to inform you that these fancies, which you have so greedily imbibed, are 1,000 years old and as musty as they are ancient? I little expected in this enlightened and scientific age to find a disciple of Albertus Magnus and Paracelsus. My dear sir, you must begin your studies entirely anew." So saying, he swept aside and wrote down a list of several books treating of natural philosophy, which he desired me to procure, and dismissed me, after mentioning that in the beginning of the following week, he intended to commence a course of lectures upon natural philosophy in its general relations, and that Monsieur Waldman, a fellow professor, would lecture upon chemistry the alternate days that he missed. I returned home not disappointed, for I had long considered those authors useless whom the professor had so strongly reprobated, but I did not feel much inclined to study the books which I procured at his recommendation. Monsieur Krempe was a little squat man with a gruff voice and repulsive countenance. The teacher therefore did not prepossess me in favor of his doctrine. Besides, I had a contempt for the uses of modern natural philosophy. It was very different when the masters of the science sought immortality and power. Such views, though futile, were grand. But now the scene was changed. The ambition of the inquirer seemed to limit itself to the annihilation of those visions on which my interest in science was chiefly founded. I was required to exchange chimeras of boundless grandeur for realities of little worth. So in other words, alchemy was way sexier than science. Bringing shit up from the dead, creating little homunculi, right? Science kind of seemed dull compared to these pipe dreams of the medieval alchemists. Such were my reflections during the first 2 or 3 days spent almost in solitude. But as the ensuing week commenced, I thought of the information which Monsieur Krempe had given me concerning the lectures. And although I could not consent to go and hear that little conceited fellow deliver sentences out of a pulpit, I recollected what he had said of Monsieur Waldman, whom I had never seen, as he had hitherto been out of town. Partly from curiosity and partly from idleness, I went into the lecturing room, which Monsieur Waldman entered shortly after. This professor was very unlike his colleague. He appeared about 50 years of age, but with an aspect expressive of the greatest benevolence. A few gray hairs covered his temples, but those at the back of his head were nearly black. His person was short, but remarkably erect, and his voice the sweetest I had ever heard. He began his lecture by a recapitulation of the history of chemistry and the various improvements made by different men of learning, pronouncing with fervor the names of the most distinguished discoverers. He then took a cursory view of the present state of the science and explained many of its elementary terms. After having made a few preparatory experiments, he concluded with a panegyric upon modern chemistry, the terms of which I shall never forget. Waldman says, "The ancient teachers of this science," said he, "promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted and that the elixir of life is a chimera. But these philosophers, whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt and their eyes to pore over the microscopes or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows." I departed highly pleased with this professor and his lecture, and paid him a visit the same evening. His manners in private were even more mild and attractive than in public, for there was a certain dignity in his mien during his lecture, which in his own house was replaced by the greatest affability and kindness. He heard with attention my little narration concerning my studies, and smiled at the names of Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus, but without the contempt that Monsieur Krempe had exhibited. He said that these were men to whose indefatigable zeal modern philosophers were indebted for most of the foundations of their knowledge. They had left to us as an easier task to give new names and arrange in connected classifications the facts which they in a great degree had been the instruments of bringing to light. The labors of men of genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning to the solid advantage of mankind. I listened to his statement, which was delivered without any presumption or affectation, and then added that his lecture had removed my prejudices against modern chemists, and I, at the same time, requested his advice concerning the books I ought to procure. I am happy, said Monsieur Waldman, to have gained a disciple, and if your application equals your ability, I have no doubt of your success. Chemistry is that branch of natural philosophy in which the greatest improvements have been and may be made. It is on that account that I have made it my peculiar study. But at the same time, I have not neglected the other branches of science. A man would make but a very sorry chemist if he attended to that department of human knowledge alone. If your wish is to become really a man of science and not merely a petty experimentalist, I should advise you to apply to every branch of natural philosophy, including mathematics. He then took me into his laboratory and explained to me the uses of his various machines, instructing me as to what I ought to procure and promising me the use of his own when I should have advanced far enough in the science not to derange their mechanism. He also gave me the list of books which I had requested, and I took my leave. Thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. Okay? So that's chapter 2, ladies and germs. I'm going to stop the screen share. Oh, cool. Look at you guys. Hey, thanks for sticking around. That was chapter 2. All right, so now we know how Victor becomes sprung on science. Thanks to Monsieur Waldman, right? He's no longer enchanted with the alchemists, although their dreams still sort of haunt him, right? You can see where this is going. Young Victor Frankenstein is going to become a badass at science, cross it with those old philosophical ideas of the alchemists, right? And bring to life an 8-foot fucking homunculus. An 8-foot homunculus. Okay, so I'm going to leave you there. I'm going to read chapter 3 at you guys, and we'll do some group work on Wednesday. That's what you can expect. We just remind you gently that the grade book is, closing on Thursday, right? Unless you want to try and cut a deal, and that would look like an extension over that long 4-day weekend, and I would need the work like directly on the other side of that. Okay, so in fact, if anybody wants to stick around and negotiate anything with me, you may do so, but it's 9:43. You know what I mean? We have like 25 minutes left. Why don't you guys turn your attention to the vocabulary work, knock out those 15 words. I think you're going to find it extremely helpful when we hit volume 1, chapter 3, which I'll read on Wednesday. All those words are plucked directly out of that particular chapter. Okay, let me just check my flow here. Nope, no additional chats. This is goodbye. Have a great day. Happy last week of marking period 4. Take it easy. And again, if anybody wants to stay around after and talk to me, please do. You have my blessing. All right.
Bye, Ms. Wilcox.
See you later. Have a great day, all. Right on.
I just have one question.
Yeah, what's up? You here?
For the romanticism and / Frankenstein lecture notes, is it just the notes we take?
Just the notes, man. And listen, you here. There's a little section in there where there's some paintings, and there's like a slide about romantic painting. You don't have to take those notes down. Just look at those paintings, be like, oh nature, oh nature, oh nature. Like that's all I want you to get out of that.
I've been done, but I was just like, oh, other questions need to be done too.
Yeah, no, in fact, the last slide is an open note quiz. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and then so the rest just turn in by before Thursday.
Yeah, man.
All right.
I think you're in pretty good shape. Yeah, here you haven't turned in your journal though yet, right?
Oh no, yeah, that's what I'm still doing.
Cool. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. I was gonna ask if I can't. Would you be willing to allow it like an extension into like when's the last day like throughout that 4-day weekend? I'm not sure.
So here's the deal, man. We're negotiating a deal right now whereby you get an extension over the 4-day weekend, right? And so that first
4-day weekend.
Friday and Monday's off.
Wow.
Yeah, man. It's coming up here. This is only a 4-day week, and then we get a 4-day weekend. What did you get?
I didn't even know that.
So, Ibrahim, I'm officially letting you have that extension if you need it. But I need it that first Tuesday back, right? So like a week from tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay.
For sure. Yep.
Cool, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anything else?
That'd be it. Appreciate it.
Okay, right on. No problem. Have a good one. What's up, Juan? Juan Flores, you out there, man? Hello. What's up? It's just me and you, buddy. But do you have any questions or need anything from me? Yeah, cool. What? How's the workload going, Juan? Okay, right on. Did you hear what I was saying to Ibrahim and Yahir? Because I'm offering, if you want to cut a deal with me, I'll give you this next weekend, this long 4-day weekend, to finish all the work. Yeah, and then but I need it like the first Tuesday we come back. I need that shit, right? Like so a week from tomorrow, everything's absolutely due. Okay, cool. Well, in that case, I'll leave you to your business. Let me know if you need any help, man. No problem, dude. And yeah, I'll see you Wednesday. All right. I'm going to end this meeting. And